So what have you got for us today?
Well, let's see. There have been
suck
two
up all the
recent Supreme Court rulings at the state level. One was in Texas here, and one was in California. And both of them have something to say about religious liberty. The Texas case expanded religious liberty within the state of Texas, I think. And I talked about that last month I was on. And this time I wanted to talk about the California case, which is about the same-sex marriage case. And there are people that claim that this particular case restricts religious liberty. And I wanted to examine that claim today. And so we sort of have a contrast between these two different decisions, one potentially expanding religious liberty, the other potentially contracting it. I don't know if that's true. So on May 15th, the California Supreme Court ruled that the state could not bar marriage of people of the same sex based on the state constitution. So that ruling only referred to that marriages within that state. And so just to get a feel for how people are responding to this, which is kind of almost hysterical, somebody had the quote, "Gay rights is just another tool in the effort not only to destroy religious freedoms, but to destroy Americanism and this nation." So
what is Americanism?
I'm not quite sure. Maybe it's...
And why is it a bad thing to destroy it? I mean, if you know what Americanism is...
Give us a call.
Give us a call. Because, you know, I think we may be looking at a word for a euphemism for Christian nation arguments.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think it's American exceptionalism, that we are better because we believe in God and we get to go out and screw everybody else over, you know, and make them believe in God. So I think that's really what was meant. So the question I'd like to address today is equality, especially gay rights, a threat to religious liberty? And I claim it's not. So I'd like to talk more about this decision, talk about some of the hysterical things that you see in the news where people were responding to this, which I think is amusing. And when we cut behind, and then examine this claim of threat to religious liberty in more detail, because I think that this claim is also hysterical, but it's a little more sophisticated in its hiding the fact. And then at the end, I'd like to talk about what's really going on and why there's this hysteria and what the implications are for religion. So maybe in the middle we can break for some calls and such.
Sure.
Same-sex marriage has been a major culture war issue, and the fight has been going on for years and will continue to go on for years.
We have our crack research team in the back has run over to Wikipedia to look up Americanism. And Wikipedia has listed it as an attitude or conviction which gives special importance to the nation or culture of the United States.
So I was pretty close.
Yeah, it seems more in tune with patriotism or the American culturism.
Sort of idea. Yeah.
So now that we know what it is, why is it a bad thing to get rid of it?
Yeah. Well, I'm not quite sure Americans.
And how is this getting rid of that?
Are by default better than other folks. I don't think that's necessarily true.
Change is bad. I hate change.
Okay, so in the history of the same-sex marriage issue, this has been going on a long time. There's been a lot of decisions as constitutional votes and as court decisions in various states. In Hawaii, there was a constitutional amendment to knock it down. In Vermont, they decided at a constitutional level to promote domestic partnership benefits, which are very similar to marriage, but within that state. By the way, none of this gives national benefits, and so this is something that the gays are trying to get, is sort of complete recognition of their rights to marry and such. Massachusetts, there was a big decision in the Massachusetts Supreme Court to allow gay marriage, but then they made a decision not to allow people to come in from other states and get married there, and I'll explain why that's important later. And then Texas, we had a constitutional vote a couple years ago to prohibit same-sex marriage. I think there have been some other states that have had decisions in there. It's been a big issue. And then now the California Supreme Court has decided the issue based on personal liberty and equal protection. And there's a quote, let's see. I'm not sure it's worth going through the quote, but you can look up the decision online. So one of the big issues here is there is kind of a full faith and credit part of, I think it's part of the Constitution, but maybe just part of federal law that basically says, well, if you make agreements in one state they're going to be valid in another state. So if you have a marriage in one state, it's going to be recognized throughout the country.
Right.
And that's just been how it has been. And so
it has to be that way. If you lived in Missouri and you got married and you moved to Texas, it would be insane for Texas to say, "Oh, you're not married here.
You have to get married here." It's
part of the united part of the United States.
Right. Right. And so this basically means that marriages are recognized federally in a sense. So in 1996, Congress passed what was called the Defense of Marriage Act. I love the way they name these things. They're so disingenuously named. So anyway, this allowed an exception for same-sex marriage under this full faith and credit, and it had some other implications as well. But so the California case is interesting in that California is not barring people from other states to come in and marry. So what's going to happen inevitably is, first off, California is going to have a big booming marriage industry, and they're going to make some money that other states could have made. Oops. Many couples will want recognition, will go in there and get married and come back to their states and want recognition. They may not get it immediately. They most likely won't. They will most likely create court challenges within those states and run those challenges up either based on their state constitutions or based on the U.S. Constitution. And so there's going to be a whole plethora of lawsuits, we'll see. And then eventually all this will bubble up to the Supreme Court, and there will be most likely a decision there in the next 10 or 20 years on same-sex marriage. That's kind of how it's going to play out. The logic in these cases is very similar to the logic used in the interracial marriage cases. This is Loving versus Virginia, which was decided in 1967 by the U.S. Supreme Court. Does the state have the right to restrict who you marry based on some qualities of the people involved? And there's almost an analogy to be made, I think, to gay marriage, right? If you're going to worry about, if it's wrong to say that the marriage between two different races, whatever that might mean, it's almost a meaningless term, really, you can't do that. Then what about sex? And so that becomes the question. So. So California and Massachusetts have ruled they have no basis to ban this sort of marriage, and so religious conservatives are very, very upset by this, and they want to stop it. And so you see all sorts of crazy stuff in response. So why would they want to stop it? Religious people can ask God to bless their marriages. They can go to church and have their church make their marriage sacred. And they can do all these things regardless of what happens with the gays, right? But by their very actions, by the fact that they want to go and meddle with the marriages of gays, who incidentally other churches are happy to marry, but it's just they can't, by their actions, they're admitting that their God cannot sanctify marriage, and their churches cannot sanctify marriage. So they're sort of admitting that that's not enough. It's not enough that we have, these religious people have the ability to go ask God and have their churches. So they're effectively admitting that what is necessary to make their marriages valid is the denying that right to others, and that God is unable to do that. So they have to go and deny that right. So that's my take on it. So
for me, there's like two separate issues here. When you say that somebody's married, there's married in the legal sense.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that.
Which is where the government has gotten involved, and it's a contract. It's the only one that matters in any real sense. It's where you get your. It's why there are subtle differences between domestic partnership law and marriage law. Essentially, you can get almost the same benefits through domestic partnership, but you have to jump through so many hoops that it's ridiculous. When instead it would be much easier for these two people just to be able to be married in the eyes of the law. That's what when people are saying that they're in favor of gay marriage, we're talking about with regard to the law. We're talking about equality under the law. There's no reason for people to have to jump through more hoops and fight like tooth and nail to get the same rights that somebody else has just because they want to marry somebody of the same sex. That's absurd. What the religious people are objecting to is a completely different thing. They're saying, this sanctity of marriage, this is a God-ordained union between a man and a woman. Well, that's the other part of marriage. That's where some churches married you. You know what happens when you go get married in a church? The person who performs the ceremony has to sign a marriage certificate in order for it to be considered legal under the law. They have to be authorized to do that. All the paperwork has to be filed. There are two separate things: a religious wedding ceremony that you could call a marriage, even if it wouldn't be legal under the law, and then the legal aspect of marriage, which is what we're really talking about. And the religious people, what Don was saying, are essentially saying, oh, your legal marriage somehow affects my religious marriage because my God's too weak to protect the sanctity of my religious marriage and keep it separate from this legal thing.
Yeah, yeah. And nobody's trying to make, nobody at this stage or at this level is trying to make churches marry gay people. Right?
And they shouldn't.
That's a church-state separation
Yes.
issue. Churches can marry whoever the heck they want. But what's going to happen in practice is people are going to say, oh, I belong to this church, I'm gay, I want to get married, will you marry me? And that's kind of where we're going with this. The punchline is what's going to happen then, and that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But that's not the state mandating the church. That's somebody who goes to that church asking, right? So that's a completely different issue. If you don't want to have a gay marriage, don't have a gay marriage.
Most of these things are business practices. I hate to break it to all of you out here who don't understand it, but churches are in fact businesses. They're nonprofit protected businesses that stockpile money and property. In this case, what are they afraid of? Well, if we're the local big shot church and we don't allow gay marriage, and there's a significant gay population in our area who'd like to, and some other church comes up and says, hey, we're all here about the love of Jesus and we don't care whether you want to get married to somebody of the same sex, all of a sudden you start losing some of your profits to this other church, and it changes the paradigm of what becomes acceptable with regard to religion. Yeah. I think the same thing is kind of true. The reason they're fighting this is they're afraid of losing their income, and I think this is one of the reasons why we had blue laws. Hey, I don't want to work on my Sabbath. This other guy who's a heathen who's willing to work on my Sabbath has a better chance to draw more income because he's doing more. So let's ban that so that I can have my day off and force him not to engage in capitalism and compete. I think that's kind of patently obvious right there what's going on. And I would say that I'm a proponent of you work harder, you earn more. And if I'm willing to work and open my store 7 days a week and you're not because you believe in some invisible man in the sky who will strike you down if you do, sucks to be you.
Yeah, you should have more business.
Yeah,
you're willing to do more work.
Yeah. How hard is that?
Well, I guess people need to realize too that capitalism is our national religion.
Yeah, that's American.
It's not Christianity. Anyway, so I'd like to point out some of the hysterics that have come up. I mean, people are just like up in arms about this gay rights thing, which is I find amusing. So I just want to hit some of these. So let's see, the director of the Capital Resource Institute says, this is a very sad day for our nation and the democratic process. And she goes on to say, 4 arrogant, elitist, activist judges decided that they know better than the people how marriage should be defined. So here she's referring to the fact that there was a popular vote within California about defining marriage and restricting marriage to a certain minority or whatever. But you have the situation where you have a bunch of people going to vote on the rights of the minority.
Right.
And this is not how our country works, right? We protect the minorities, and if the minorities have certain rights as given by the Constitution or the state Constitution, the national Constitution, that takes precedence. And that's just that's America.
Yeah, this statement could only be made by somebody who ignorantly believes that we live in a simple majority rules society. That is simply not true. We live, first of all, in a representative republic. We do get to vote. Your vote matters, and I encourage people to vote. But it doesn't matter what the majority votes for if it violates the Constitution and the principles that the nation was founded on. The Constitution exists to protect minorities from the whim of the majority.
That's right.
You couldn't all get together as a majority and say, we've decided that atheists should be slaves. What?
As appealing as that might be to some people.
And likewise, you should not be allowed to get together to vote that somebody else cannot marry somebody else just because you object to it or because your invisible friend objects to it. That's insane. They have rights and freedoms too. And just because you have the numbers does not make you right.
Yep. That's right. And we had that same sort of thing here in Texas, where we had a majority vote based on the rights of minority. Now, if Christians really believe in Jesus and they do unto others, then what about having gays, the majority of gays, vote on whether Christians can get married? Ooh. Wouldn't that be appropriate? And because of the exact same reason that you just gave, we can't have that. We can't have a minority or we can't have a majority vote on the rights of others. That's just not how it works. So we have all sorts of quotes related to this. It's a blow to our government system that activist judges would use the judicial system and baseless constitutional arguments, not true, to push their radical political agenda on citizens. Radical political agenda.
Boy,
equality
you guys throw
is
in
radical.
so many buzzwords in your outrage. It's hilarious. Activist judges, radical movements. Yeah, it's radical. It is kind of radical in the same sense that it was radical to get rid of slavery.
Okay. So here, Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council says, it's outrageous that the court has overturned not only the historic definition of marriage, but the clear will of the people of California as expressed in Proposition 22.
More nonsense of the will of the people. Hey, here's a tip. If you don't want to marry somebody of the same sex, don't.
Right.
Pretty easy.
Right. So it's not being foisted on anyone. Here's something from protectmarriage.com, which is a conservative thing. They say, oh, well, you've got to have, this is from the top 10 talking points about same-sex marriage. The first one has to do with collective wisdom. And they say for Christians, the Bible is unequivocal on the subject, one man, one woman for life.
Hey, here's a tip. Your Bible is not the authority on what constitutes legal marriage, which is why non-Christians are allowed to marry in this country. As long as non-Christians are allowed to marry, you don't get to cite the Bible as the authority on marriage. As long as our Constitution is not paying deference to any particular religion, you don't get to use any of them. We have laws. Right. Marriage is a legal contract between two people. We have supposedly this idea of equality and freedom and rights that are being denied individuals out of ignorance and prejudice. That we're trying to correct the situation here.
Right. So there's another argument that kind of relates to this, and that is there's a slippery slope that supposedly establishing same-sex marriage as a fundamental right will undermine current polygamy laws and create a new legal precedent for anything goes forms of marriage. Well, when you put this Bible thing together and polygamy laws, it's like you better get your story straight, because if you go reading the Bible, marriage was like one man and however many women you could get your hands on, and concubines too.
How many wives did David have again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me the Bible's against polygamy.
And furthermore, traditional marriage tradition is a man owns the woman; she's property, right? And that's not. So what they're arguing for, based on tradition and slippery slope arguments and polygamy, is just complete nonsense, right? It's like they haven't even cracked their Bible, which is amazing to me.
If we let those homos married people be marrying animals and have 4 wives, look, I'm going to marry Muhammad.
Together. Right.
Love you, Muhammad.
Right. This is pretty hysterical. So there's a woman by the name of Sally Kern, who's an Oklahoma lawmaker, who said that homosexuality poses a bigger threat to the U.S. than terrorism. So that's just too funny.
How?
And she claims.
What are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Why isn't Osama recruiting gays?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the big threat, what's the big threat? That you'll have nicer clothes and.
Yeah. So we'll come back to her in a minute. So I think these are all pretty hysterical, right? Did you want to maybe break for a call?